presentation is entitled Hot Student Jobs, and we've got a young fellow by the name of Alexander, and I'm going to introduce him shortly. He's going to be joining us. He's going to be the feature of this presentation. So I just wanted to go over a couple little things. Again, my name is Rod. I'm an employment specialist with Next Steps Employment Center, and I'm glad that you're all affiliated with one of our offices that is close to where you live. We have, as you know, we have 7 offices throughout the Greater Toronto area. So I'm glad that you're able to find out more about this workshop and perhaps others that are coming up over the next number of weeks. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about this platform. So it looks like everybody's doing well so far. You've got your mics muted. Everything looks good from my angle. I can see everybody's name and so on and so forth. You also notice that you probably noticed there's some options in terms of chatting and whatnot. There may be some other options that, that you can see that are available to you. In terms of the chat feature, what we're going to do is based on sort of the overall timing, we'll hold your questions towards the latter part of the session. I'm going to make some notes. If you're able to jot down some specific questions for Alexander, you're welcome to do that. And I think what we'll do so that he can get through all his content towards the end of the presentation, we will, talk a little bit about some of the burning questions that you have. However, I've also given you a technical support number here. So if you experience any major issues today with the platform, feel free to give our tech support people a call. And if you just want to write down on a scrap piece of paper the telephone number that you see here, that would be very, very helpful. So when you contact that 800 number, you can answer a few little questions that they have, and they're going to be able to assist you from there. So these folks are very, very good. So again, I'm glad that you're going to grab some scrap paper, make some notes. Alexander has some great thoughts and ideas that he wanted to share with you and some secrets that I'm not going to tell you too much about right now, but he's got some really good content that's going to be helpful as we move along. So again, I'm going to encourage people to make a few little notes. I think that will be very happy for reference purposes. Yeah, so let me just make sure that everything else is good. What else do we want to say? Yeah, so I'm going to introduce Alexander, and then we're going to flip it over to him. He's got some slides that he'd love to show you. And again, throughout his presentation, feel free to make some notes, maybe around questions or whatever. That would be great. So let me introduce this young fellow. You see a beautiful picture of him today. So Alexander is actually a co-founder of Swob Incorporated. You're going to find out all about Swob in just a few minutes. But the truth is, Swob is an award-winning social recruitment platform that you're going to really appreciate understanding. And the other thing that's nice about today is that some of the material and perhaps some of the technology that we talk about, it's things that you can share with other people in your family and other friends and colleagues, because I think in the big picture, it's going to be very, very helpful. Alexander's graduated from York University and Seneca College with an education in marketing and advertising. And he also is working or co-launched this platform, or Swob, with his sister, and her name is Stephanie. So what's great, well, you know what, I'm not going to tell you too much about Swob because it's pretty innovative. It's very, very cool. And all I can tell you, it's certainly going to be very, very helpful as somebody looks for work and using a really interesting little tool. One thing that's very interesting about Alexander and his sister is that in May of 2018, Sir Richard Branson and Virgin Mobile Canada awarded Swob as the first ever Canadian company to win his Pitch to Rich contest, which is very, very interesting. And that happened a few years ago in Vancouver. And I mean, it's been unbelievable in terms of the amount of coverage and the work that's been going into that kind of platform. Alexander is a superstar, actually. He's appeared on a number of shows, including BNN Bloomberg, E-Talk, The Feed with Amber Mack, Omni TV, The Marilyn Dennis Show, and it goes on and on and on. So folks, you're going to enjoy today's presentation. Feel free to make some notes as we move along, and towards the end of the platform or the session, we're going to be able to ask some of those specific questions to him. So I'm going to turn it over to him. He's going to show you some great slides, and we'll go from there. So go ahead there, young fella.
All right. So Rod, thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Really appreciate that. I'm just going to share my screen now and hopefully get everything up and running. Okay, so I hope everybody can see that. So just before we begin, like Rod said, I do encourage you, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free, get them going in that chat box there, and I'm happy to answer any questions after the presentation is completed. So I think if we're good to begin, I'm just going to jump into the presentation that I have here for everyone here today. But first off, I would like to thank everybody who's joining today. I really appreciate everyone taking the time to join. For me, I really hope that by the end of this, the biggest thing that I hope for is that you're all able to take some value from this, hopefully learn something new, and then be able to use this or these tips when you go and actually seek out employment. So who am I? Rod, I think he gave a perfect introduction there. But like Rod said, my name is Alexander Florio. I am one of the co-founders of Swob, which is, like you mentioned, an award-winning recruitment platform that we developed in November of 2017. So prior to starting Swob, I was working in marketing and advertising. And I'll tell you a little story of what sort of inspired Swob and why we actually developed this. But prior to launching this, as I mentioned, I was working downtown Toronto at a marketing agency. And when I first got hired, I loved it. It was, it was everything that I had wanted in terms of a marketing agency and where I wanted to be. But fast forward a few months, and I just found myself miserable in my role. I wasn't enjoying my role anymore, and I started looking for other opportunities in the industry. And through that process of looking for other roles, it was very frustrating and wasn't very productive, and it wasn't very efficient. And so that really kind of frustrated me. And I thought, I want to do something different. I want to create something that's going to make this process much easier, not only for the job seeker, but for the employer as well. And that's one thing I'm going to talk about as well is, just as difficult as it is for the job seekers to find employment, it's just as difficult, if not more so, on the employer's side to find great candidates and great people. So I'm going to hopefully share some tips that you'll be able to learn from and be able to attract more employers. Like Rod mentioned, I have appeared on BNN Bloomberg, eTalk, The Feed with Amber Mack, Marilyn Dennis Show, and I recently spoke at Elevate Tech Fest in Toronto last September. And I'm actively volunteering with the WE organization, the WE charity, as a mentor for their WE Incubation Hub, which empowers young social entrepreneurs to develop and launch their own social enterprises. So that's a really cool thing for me to do and volunteer. Okay, so let's just jump in. So again, the problem that we noticed prior to launching is that for employers, they were spending way too much time on other job sites, finding candidates, and they weren't finding the right people. And so a lot of the problems and frustrations that we heard from the employer side was they were wasting time on the wrong candidates, screening candidates when none of them were local, which is a big one. They want local people. And obviously with high turnover industries, turnover is 70% per year on average. So it's really difficult for them to find talent and keep talent within their organizations. So that's becoming a big problem for them. Now, on the student side and the young job seeker side or job seeker side, the process of looking for employment was equally as frustrating. They felt as if there was a lack of resources. And to our surprise, we held focus groups. We met with a lot of young job seekers. We spoke to over 5,000 students prior to launching. And we were surprised to learn that the number one way on how these job seekers were looking for employment was they were still printing out stacks of resumes, going into malls or wherever and handing them out one by one, not even knowing who's hiring. And for a lot of them, this was frustrating because they more often than not felt as if their resume was just being tossed in a pile. And it's funny, on the employer side, they were getting so many resumes that they didn't even know what to do with them. So it was equally as frustrating on both sides. So that's why we wanted to develop Swob and make it more efficient for the job seeker. So the solution was Swob. And so we help students and job seekers find employment, and we help employers find jobs. Oh, can you hear me? Sorry, somebody just mentioned that it's not working. Can everybody still see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that everything worked there. But yeah, so like I said, we help job seekers find work and we help employers find job seekers. And so Swab was really developed to make the search easy. So how Swab works, and I'll get into it a little bit later on, more into detail, but it is an app that we've designed. It's free to download and available for both Apple and Google Play users. So if you are looking for a job, you can download the app now, both platforms. It is free. So keep that in mind. And it's very simple. You create a quick profile, answer a few questions. Then you would attach your resume. And then based on your location and the industries that you've selected within the app, jobs will appear. And then from there, you're able to apply. So really simple. And we're showing you jobs that are in your area. So I know the big focus of today is different resume tips and interview tips and things that you maybe should or shouldn't include on a resume. And so being an employer myself and seeing a lot of resumes, I've seen examples that are really strong and some that are just really poor. And so before we get into that, what is a resume? And so a resume is really an advertisement of you, and it is a snapshot of who you are, as well as shares your professional and educational and work qualifications. So why is a resume important? Well, you obviously need a resume to land an interview, but you also have to keep in mind that a resume isn't necessarily going to land you a job. So I've had, for example, people who have reached out to me, sending me their resume and automatically assuming that they've landed employment or landed that position, and that's not how it works. You need to do an interview first before you actually get employed. So that's just something I found with a lot of people reaching out, was that they just assume they got the job, but that's not the case. And your resume will get the employer interested in your abilities. So it's really something that's going to pop, and it's sort of their first impression of you, of who you are and what your background and qualifications are. And like I mentioned, a resume allows you to provide a positive first impression before an employer even has an opportunity to meet with you. So the first thing that they're judging you on is your resume. So what is not a resume? So I've seen a lot of resumes come to me that share that individual's life story, their background, their story, and it's certainly not an autobiography. So you don't want to be sharing your life story on a resume. You have to realize that employers, and I'm guilty of this as well, when I was younger and starting my career, I thought having a 4 or 5 page resume with just content, and the more information, I thought that was more beneficial. But after slowly realizing and learning that, employers don't want that. They want short, concise. They want, the information up front, and they don't want it to be super lengthy, because, they don't want to be going through a 4 or 5 page resume. At most, I think a 2 page resume is probably the best way to go. And a resume, again, doesn't guarantee you a job, but it'll help you land that interview. So keep that in mind. And you only want to share what is marketable and relevant to the role that you're applying to. So when I say that, I've seen a lot of resumes come my way where somebody is applying to a role in advertising, for example, but in their objective, they're talking about how they want to work in finance. So these are some things that a lot of people don't really look out for them, and they're big mistakes, and it can cost you in the long run. So it's something that you have to be mindful of and make sure that you're sharing, or your objective is sharing, what industry you want to be in and what exact role you're applying to, because that's a big thing that a lot of even students make mistakes, and they don't share the right information. So how should you format a resume? There's so many different formatting tools that are available now that you can use. So for example, Canva is a great one. Canva has all of these really nice templates that have properly formatted resumes that you can use. If you haven't made a resume or are thinking about changing your resume, Canva is a site I definitely would recommend. But you certainly want to list your work experience by dates. And in my opinion, the most recent should be first. And a proper formatted resume should include the following. So a heading, a job objective, which we just talked about. So example, if you are applying to a marketing coordinator role, you want to indicate that, because again, if you're applying to a marketing coordinator role and your objective is you're looking for a role in finance, right away, that's a big red flag to the employer, and odds are you won't be getting a call. And these are little mistakes that people make that are easy to fix. You also want to include your summary of qualifications, your past work experience and education, as well as your skills and abilities. So what should you include as your objective? So like we mentioned, a short statement that explains to the employer what specific role you are applying for. And you want it to be short, concise, and specific. So you want to make sure that you're providing the proper information, not going too crazy with how much information you're including, but you just want it to be concise and specific to the roles that you are applying to. And that's something where you can always change that in a resume, regardless of what role you're applying to. You don't need to change everything else in your resume, but that information can change, and that's an easy thing to do every time you're applying to a different role in a different industry. So what should you include in the summary of qualifications? So this is really where you want to showcase about what you think makes you the best candidate for the role. So for example, your skills and abilities, your work experience, and even your accomplishments. I think a lot of people who I've seen or who I've spoken to in regards to building out their resume, a lot of them don't want to include accomplishments or awards that they might have won. And I think, well, why? It's something that, an employer will want to see that. And even if you don't have work experience necessarily, but you have previous volunteer experience or other things that you've been involved in, whether it's maybe school groups or different extracurricular activities, these are things that you want to share because it's still showing the employer that you're taking initiative and that you're still looking to get out there and show that you want to work and that you're doing things that are going to help you in the long run. And that's not only helping you when you're looking for a job, but you're showing that you're getting outside of your bubble and you're willing to go above and beyond and do things that you don't necessarily need to be doing. It also must reflect what is required in the job description. So again, that's a big one. You want to make sure you're specific to the roles that you're applying to. And have it short, 1 paragraph or 3 to 5 bullet points. You don't need to go crazy. You don't need to put any more information than that. You want to just make sure it's short and concise and specific. And this section is really important because this is typically the first thing the employer will see on your resume. So this is what's going to catch their attention. And if it doesn't grab their attention right away, probably not a good sign. And so you want to make sure you're grabbing that employer's attention right off the bat. And I hope this makes sense to everybody so far. And I hope that you all have some great questions for me at the end of this. So additional components. So what else you can include? So like we just talked about, different activities that you're involved in, whether it's sports, music, volunteering, honors that you might have received, whether from school, certificates that you have, and like I just said, achievements and awards. These are things that I'm not too sure why, but a lot of people don't include it. And I guess it's fear of looking kind of overly confident, but I don't think it's a bad thing. So I certainly would always encourage anybody who's building out a resume that if they have achievements that they're proud of or awards that they've won, by all means share that because you had to work hard for that award and that achievement. So why wouldn't you want to share that? And an employer would love to see those types of things. Okay, so now I want to talk about what not to include on a resume. And so I've seen resumes where it has all of this information and it's a head scratcher for me. These are things that you certainly don't need to include on a resume. And so those are obviously your list of interests and hobbies, unless it is related to the role. So if it is related to the role, then it's fine to share it. You also have to keep in mind that it's got to still be specific to that job. So if you're applying to other jobs using that same resume, you have to remember you have to adjust those interests and hobbies unless it relates to that role. And this is another one that I see all the time, and it does not need to be included on a resume, and that is your height, your weight, your age, date of birth, place of birth, your marital status, your sex, your ethnicity, race, social security number, reasons for leaving previous jobs, religion, or political affiliations. This is something where an employer does not need to see this. They more than likely don't want to see it, or they don't want to see it, and it should just not be included. So if you have any of that information in your resume, please remove it because the employers don't want to see that. and it's just really not necessary in a resume at all. And then obviously this one is a big one, but don't lie. You always want to be honest on your resume and make sure that you're including information that is truthful. If you are lying about something on a resume, the employer will more than likely catch that lie, and it's only going to hurt you in the long run. So I know it seems obvious, and you're probably sitting there saying, you know, who is this guy telling us not to lie on our resume? But I've seen it time and time again, and it's just something you do not want to do. So additional components. So what else? So obviously you want to make sure to review and edit it. So for me, for example, I'm really big on grammar. I notice grammar mistakes right away when it's in my case. It's something that I actively look out for. And so if it's something that I do, you better believe other employers are looking out for this as well. So you obviously want to make sure that you have people review your resume, and you want people that are going to be open to share some honest feedback and critique your resume. Because if you're having somebody look at it and just kind of scan it over quickly and they say, yeah, it's great, it's not really going to help you. So you want people who are going to review it and be honest with you. So be open to feedback, because it's going to help you in the long run, and it'll help make sure that your resume is as strong as it can be when you're actually looking for job positions and sending out your resume. Because again, a resume is a reflection of you, and you want to be sure that you're putting your best foot forward when you're applying to roles, and you want to make sure that you look good to an employer. And so if you're sending out a resume that has spelling mistakes or grammar errors, right away it's a red flag, and it just doesn't look good on you. And more often than not, you're not going to be called in for an interview. So be open to feedback. Make sure you have friends or family review it, and you'll see that it's going to benefit you later on when you're applying. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about interview tips, because interview tips, this is something that we get asked quite a bit about, especially with users who are applying to roles on Swob. You know, we've heard from people who have been called for an interview, but not necessarily got the role. And so they usually come back to us and say, oh, well, I got an interview, but I didn't get the job position. And so I think more often than not, it's not because of your resume, because if you've landed an interview, odds are you had a pretty strong resume, and it was something where the employer was attracted to your resume. So they obviously brought you in for an interview for a reason. So here are some things that you can do to make sure that when you do get called in for an interview, it'll help you make sure you're best prepared. So the first thing is, obviously you want to research the company. This is such a big one. And even for myself, when I hold interviews with people who are applying to roles with us, I will ask them, you know, what can you tell me about Swab? And if they can't say anything, or if they have not a clue, and I'll know right away that they haven't done their homework. Right away, that's just not a good impression. It doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth. And more often than not, I'm not following up with that candidate, or they're not going to be receiving that job. And I could tell you a little story. One of the agencies that I worked at prior to Swab, in marketing, if you went to an interview and you were amazing, great candidate, but you couldn't name at least two of the clients that agency represented, you weren't getting that job. And to them, it showed that you didn't care enough to do your homework and to do your basic research. And so that's something where it's obvious. It might seem obvious again, but a lot of people don't do it. A lot of people go into an interview thinking they can wing it, and that is totally the wrong approach. So make sure you research the company and have some talking points about that company that you feel pretty strong and confident about. And that leads me to my next point. You want to have questions ready. And so when you go to an interview, and the employer at the end of the interview, more often than not, will say, this is an opportunity for you to ask questions. And for me, this is such an important part of the interview as an employer, because I'm curious to see what kind of questions you have and what you're coming up with and what your thoughts are. And, you know, I tell people something like workplace culture is such a big thing these days. Candidates and employees, or people going for job interviews, want to make sure that where they're potentially going to be working for 3, 5, 10 years down the road is a great place to work, that their employees are happy, that they have a fun workplace environment, that they're doing things outside of work to bring kind of the staff together and make sure they're having a good time. So if you're stuck on questions, you can always ask about the workplace culture. I think that's a really big one. And it's something where you want to know, you want to make sure that this is going to be a place where you feel comfortable. So there's nothing wrong with that, but certainly having an interview and not having any questions prepared at the end to ask, it doesn't look good on you. And that's, I think, a big test that employers have, where they want to see what your thoughts are and what kind of questions you have. Another thing that you can be doing is mock interviews. So again, it's pretty simple. If you have a friend or a family member sit with you and research the most common interview questions that people get asked, you could sit and do an interview and practice what you think will be the questions. This is a great opportunity to really brush up on what your answers might be. And even though the questions that you get asked during a mock interview might not necessarily be the questions you get asked during the interview, it's always going to help you prepare. It's always going to help make sure that you're speaking confident, clearly. And these are things, again, that employers look for. And one other thing that I like to do when I do an interview is I like to throw in a bit of a curveball question. The reason for that is I had it done myself to me. So I can tell you a little story. When I was in school, I was interviewing for a role, and right when I sat down in the employer's office, he looked at me and asked me, "What's 9 times 9?" And I always thought that was such an interesting question. And my math skills aren't the best, but I'm certainly happy that I answered the question correctly. And when he asked me, "Why do you think I asked you what 9 times 9 is?" my response was to see how I react to that. And he looked at me and he said, "That's 100% right. I like to throw out kind of curveball questions to see what people's reactions are." And thankfully enough, I'm glad that I knew the answer, because again, my math is not the best, but that's another story. So again, really the importance of mock interviews. It's something that a lot of people can do, and it's easy to do, and it doesn't take much time. And then review the dress code. So this is another thing that's really, it's so important. And I always say you want to make sure you're dressing professionally. Even if you're applying for a job as a burger flipper somewhere, it's, in your mind, you might think it's easy to just throw on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, but you don't, go the extra mile. This is, again, it's the first impression an employer is going to have of you. And so I could tell you another story where one of the agencies that I worked at prior to Swob, when I went for the interview, it was a very laid back environment, very casual office. I could have showed up to the interview in jeans and a shirt, but I decided to throw on a suit. And the employer loved that. And in his mind, he thought, "Look at this guy. He's respecting, he's showing respect to me, showing respect to our agency. He's throwing on a suit. He looks good. It shows that he cares." So it's easy to do. So, I mean, when you're going for interviews, regardless of the role that you're interviewing for, dress the part, look appropriate, and, go above and beyond. And then obviously you want to know the job that you want. So if you're somebody who's just looking for any type of job, that's fine. But you also have to remember that it's going to be different sets of questions that you're going to be asked, different skills, different qualifications. So just make sure that you're prepared and you have the answers to follow up the questions. And then here's another one, which is really important. Be early. But when I say that, you don't want to be too early, because if you show up to an interview 30 minutes, 45 minutes earlier to an interview, you might think in your mind, "That's great, I'm showing up early." But in the employer's eyes, they're thinking, "What do I do with this individual? How do I keep them entertained for a half an hour?" And it can kind of get awkward. So you don't want to do that, but you do want to show up 10 minutes early. Make sure, that they know that you're there, and have conversations with the people that are around you. It's something that's easy, but one of the things that's I find really interesting is, oftentimes if you're sitting in reception and waiting to get called in for your interview, have a conversation with whoever's sitting behind the reception desk there, because an employer will go and ask that person sitting there and ask, "Did they talk to you? Was there any conversation? What was that person like?" And so keep that in mind. Like, they're doing everything that they can to make sure they're getting as much information about you as possible, and that's something that they do. So make sure you're 10 minutes early, and, you know, have conversations with whoever's sitting at the reception desk. And if there's no one there, just sit and be patient and wait for them to call you in. But certainly don't be a burden and get there an hour early and make them kind of hurry up whatever they're doing so that they can start with the interview. So what employers are looking for. So when an employer is bringing you in for an interview, what they want to see is, you know, can you do the job? Do you have the skills? And do you even want the job? Or are you just applying to this role because it's just a job that you applied to and you ended up getting called in for it? And are you motivated? So they want to see, do you have that drive, that eagerness, that passion? Do you have a willingness to learn? You know, I think there's a misconception with a lot of people looking for jobs that education is the biggest thing that's going to help you land a role. And it is. Education and previous work experience is obviously key when you're applying to roles and whether or not you land a job. But I'll tell you again a story. So when I was in university, I worked as a summer student downtown for an insurance broker. And every summer, I would meet with my employer at the beginning of the summer just to kind of go over expectations. And then I would meet at the end just to review how the summer was, and learn about areas that I can improve on. And one of the things that always really stood out to me was when he was doing interviews, education was really, you know, it wasn't the most important thing. Yeah, it obviously had influence, but what he was looking for was somebody who had passion, somebody who's willing to come in and learn, and somebody who was going to work their tail off. And it didn't matter whether you had the fanciest degrees or a high school education. What he wanted to see was that you had that drive and that eagerness. And if you have that and you show that in an interview, it's going to look good on you. And then so again, will you fit in, and do you share similar values to that employer? And so these are all things that employers are looking for when they're bringing you in for an interview. And you want to make sure that, again, you're aligned with all of their values, and make sure that you have done your research on the company prior to make sure that you know their values. So first impressions, like I mentioned, they are key. First impressions are what will help you, and it's again that first sort of interaction. It's more than likely it's going to be the most lasting one. So dress appropriate. Make sure you have a copy of your resume and your cover letter on file, or have a copy with you, because again, the employer, they might not have your resume with them during an interview. So make sure you have a copy as a backup. If you don't, it's not a good sign. So make sure you have at least 1 or 2 copies with you. Again, arrive on time. You want to be about 10 minutes early, and be relaxed and be confident, but also keep in your mind that you are being observed. And this is another big one, body language. So make sure you're making eye contact and shake hands. For me, I'm a big believer in a handshake, and I've had interviews where people have just left without shaking my hand, and I don't know whoever taught them that or where they thought that that was appropriate, but for me, a good handshake is a good sign. And so keep that in mind, because these are, again, big things that you might not think the employer is looking out for, but you better believe they are. So now I want to talk a little bit about Swab and how we can help you in your employment search. So as I mentioned prior, Swab is an app that we have developed for job seekers. It is free to download and available for both iPhone and Android users, or App Store and Google Play users. And how it works is, once you've downloaded the app, you answer a few simple questions, and then you would attach your resume. You include your postal code, and that will help filter the jobs in your area. And then, as you see on the third slide there, you'll see job type. You can select whether or not you're looking for part-time or full-time, and the industry that you want to be in. And once you've done all of that, jobs will appear. So this is a bit of a silly comparison, but we like to call ourselves, for those who might not know, the Tinder for jobs. So similar to that dating app, once a job appears, if a user doesn't want to apply to a role, they can swipe left or select the X. And if they do want to apply to the role, they can swipe right on the posting or select the check mark. And what happens is, when you've applied, or when you've swiped right on a role, you're applying to that role, and the profile that you've created on the app, as well as your resume, is being sent off to the employer. And for anybody who's interested in learning more about the role or seeing the different summary or qualifications for that role, the little eye icon on the bottom right corner If you select that, you'll see the entire job descriptions, responsibilities, requirements, and etc. So really simple, really easy to use. So this part here is for employers. Our website is built for the employers, and they would select looking to hire, and that's where employers go to sign up, post jobs, remove jobs, screen candidates, and all of that. And for any employers who might be interested, there's 30-day free trial once you sign up, and you're pretty well good to go. And if you are a job seeker who's on the site, if you're looking for the app, you just select looking for a job, and it'll direct you right to the App Store or Google Play. So just some of the companies that we're working with right now include McDonald's, Tim Hortons, Leon's, Pizzaville, The Source, just to name a few. And actually, I want to give a quick little story here. So Pizzaville, as you see on that list, they were one of the first ever companies to post a job with us. And they mentioned to us that for the role that they posted, it takes them approximately 6 weeks to hire for. But when they posted that role on Swob, they were able to hire someone within 2 weeks. So we really cut down that hiring time. So it just shows if you do all of the right things and follow all of the steps that we talked about, the turnaround can be pretty quick. Now, obviously that depends on the employer, but if you're doing all of the right things, you're going to stand out. Here's a testimonial from one of the people managers who's posted some roles with us from McDonald's, and he mentions how using Swob has been a great experience for him, and how the dashboard is easy to navigate and use, and how it's been able to help him connect to applicants in a way he couldn't before. And as Rod mentioned in the introduction, Swob was named the first ever Canadian company to win Richard Branson's Pitch to Rich contest. So this was the first time he's ever held this competition in Canada. And for us, it was really humbling to know that out of thousands of entries across Canada, he personally selected us as the winners. So we had an opportunity to spend some time with Richard Branson and really be able to pick his brain, which was just an incredible experience. But I think he really saw the value in what we were trying to do. And that was one of the reasons why he mentioned he selected us as the winners, is that we really want to put people to work. We want to make it easy, and we really want there to be no excuses. We want to make job finding or job searching easy, and we want to make it easy for both the employer and the job seekers. Here are some of the places that we've been featured in, and they include the Canadian Startup Awards, Blog TO, Omni TV, BNN Bloomberg, and the Marilyn Dennis Show, just to name a few. And that is my presentation. So I really appreciate all of you taking the time to join me. Like I said earlier, I really do hope that you're able to take some value from this. For me, I'm always open to doing these types of things and answering any questions. I go live every Monday on my Facebook page at 1 o'clock. Obviously, today was a little different. We pushed that back a bit. But if you are interested in other webinars or other sessions that I'm doing, check out our Facebook page. It's at Swob Inc. You can even check out our YouTube channel. Again, it's at Swob Inc. as well. There we have a bunch of the webinars that we've done in the past, as well as other kind of informational videos. So if you are interested in joining a Monday live stream, check us out on our Facebook. You can register even on Eventbrite. If not, be sure to check out our YouTube channel, subscribe. There's always videos that we're posting to make sure that we're always adding value and providing great information. But now I want to have an opportunity. So if you have any questions for me, I'd love to answer the questions that you have, and yeah, hopefully add some more value.
Very good. Just before we go on to the questions, I'm glad that people are ready to ask Alexander some questions. I just want to say thanks for all this great content. I mean, what a nice little review of some amazing tips and strategies in terms of the entire resume. You were so dead on in regards to some key things that, that we often discuss at length with our clients also, Alexander. So that's good. And again, congratulations on your award-winning app. I mean, I know that Swob is getting a lot of traction and things are moving very, very well. And I know that the employers that you're working with, along with all those eager beavers, are very, very happy with everything. So that's amazing.
Thank you,
So
Rod. Appreciate that.
No, you're very welcome. So folks, maybe what we could do is, if you do have a question, I'll get you to raise your hand, and then maybe what I can do is play the moderator, and the person with the first hand up, we can move over to Alexander to help you out. So if you have a question, if you could raise your hand, that would be terrific. Now, I wonder if you're able to locate that feature. Your system or your view may be a little different than mine, folks, so I apologize about that. Maybe what we can do is if you see down at the bottom of your or on your monitor, do you see something that says reactions? I wonder if we can, instead of a hand, maybe we could just get you to put a thumbs up, and maybe we can use that as a bit of a guideline if there's some questions. Okay, so we do have one question from Finelli. I'll give it to that person to ask Alexander that question. Go ahead. Finelli, if there's a question, just go ahead and turn on your microphone. I think you've got it on mute at this point in time, and you are welcome to ask Alexander a question. Would you like to do that? Go ahead. Oh, yeah, he's very good. He's just giving you a great thumbs up because that was an amazing presentation.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions for Alexander today? I'll get you just to indicate that by, oh, okay, Puman, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Alexander, for this good presentation. I just want to know more about summary. What we have to include in summary section?
So in your summary, it's really a snapshot of who you are and the role that you're applying to. So again, you want to make sure that it's very specific to the role that you're applying to. And again, you know, if you look at templates like Canva, they'll show you the type of information that should be included, but you really want it to just be short, concise, and very specific. And the biggest thing for me, at least, is if you're applying to a role in, for example, advertising, then you want to make that clear. And you don't want to be applying to a role in advertising and have your objective say, I'm so-and-so and I'm looking for a role in finance, because it just shows that you really don't care. You're not taking the proper time to adjust things accordingly. So you really want to make sure that you keep that in mind. And again, like I said, check out things like Canva or sites like Canva. They have great example templates that you can use that'll show you what you should be including in your objective. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course.
Very good. So we have a question from Jessica, and she's asking some information in terms of, do you put the year in the education section when that appears on the resume?
Yes, you definitely want to include that. I've seen resumes that have had that educational experience there, where it just shows that the individual has graduated with a degree or whatever it was. But for me, it's like, I want to know, when did you graduate? So you can, and that's something that's just easy. You know, you put your start date, you put when you graduated. So yes, definitely include that. Okay,
thank you very much, Alexander. Another question from Lynn, and it says, what is the employment rating amongst the recipients?
So if you're talking about Swab and how and what the employment rate for those users are, it really depends on the employer. But one thing that I can guarantee you is we are actively communicating with the employers who are posting roles on Swab and always encouraging them to reach out to candidates because we want to make sure that, you know, as much as we want to make sure that we're providing employers a great experience, we also want to make sure that for those job seekers who are applying to roles, that they're actually being communicated to and that they're actually being reached out to. And so one thing that I will also say that I didn't actually mention during the presentation is on Swab, we have a feature, it's called Swab Verified Candidates. So if you think about Instagram or Twitter and you see a celebrity, they have that blue check mark next to their name. Well, similar to Swab, we have a feature like that where if you include all of the right information in your profile, you take some time in your profile, put in some thought into your answers, and include your own resume, you will become Swab verified and get a blue check mark next to your name. And this is our way of saying to the employer, hey, take a look at this candidate first, because we feel they've got a great profile and a great resume, so you should look at them first. So if you're Swab verified and you want to be Swab verified, make sure you do everything properly. And those are the candidates that more often than not get a call first. But again, it really depends on the employer. I could tell you that we have many people who've been hired through Swab, But again, it's just depending on the employer, but just know that we are always encouraging them to reach out to candidates and make sure that, regardless if you want to bring somebody in for an interview or not, have the courtesy to let that person know. So we're always saying, even if you don't want to bring somebody in, send them a message, let them know, thank you for applying, because that goes a long way.
Okay, yeah, I think that answered her question. I know that she had to go to another meeting, so that's right. She just left the platform. Does anybody else have any other questions? You're welcome to either submit them through the chat feature that you see that has a lot of activity, or if you want to raise your hand, that's another good option to ask Alexander a question. Any other questions? Okay, so over the next minute or two, oh, here's one here from Jessica. So if one of the education is different from the job.
Still include it. Even though it might not be in the same industry or the same kind of educational requirements they're looking for, it's still something you've done. So you always want to include that. And I'm a big believer in that. So even if you're applying to a job in finance and you have a background in marketing, still include that, because it's showing that you've still done something and you're still certified for something, or you've done certain education. So I would certainly say include that as well.
Okay, very good. And now she also qualified here. So again, I think you spoke to it. If one of the education is different from the position, do I need to put this in the education still?
Yeah, I would still share that, because it's better than not sharing anything at all.
Okay, very good. Does anybody else have any questions? Again, I'll get you to submit that through in the chat feature, or perhaps just raise your hand, and Alexander will be happy to provide some insight. Okay, so Jessica's following up with another question. She's suggesting that the education obtained was a long time ago. So how far would you go back, Alexander? What do you think?
Again, I would still include it, because there, even if you have education that might be different from the position you're applying to, there are still so many things that you can learn, and different skills that you learn through education that will still help you in a job. So certainly you want to include it. I'm a big believer in that. I think, again, like I said, it's better to include it than not include it at all. And it's still showing, you still did the education, you still have an education. So even if it's not necessarily, if it's not, if it doesn't fit with the sort of the position itself, or even if it was obtained a while back, still included, I think.
Okay, very good. So some good thoughts there. Okay, so any other questions? I'll get you to submit that if you would, or raise your hand. Okay, so you know what? Thank you again, Alexander. That's amazing. Maybe what we can do is just flip the screen share piece, and let's see if I can pull something up. That would be amazing. Okay, so folks, we're just moving towards conclusion here again. So again, just like Alexander mentioned, I really appreciate you coming into the environment today and spending some time with Alexander. Again, there was some great content that he shared with you, and we appreciate all that information. And of course, your feedback is going to be very, very important moving forward. And I know that he's looking forward to hearing from everybody. So I believe I've got everybody's email address or some information where I can send you a little bit of a link to secure a little bit of feedback. However, there's a few people that I may not have registered. And I wonder if they wouldn't mind staying behind, if that's comfortable. That would be Finelli, Jessica, NAK04. I think that person left. And number 9, if you could stay behind just for a few moments, maybe I can get your email address so that we can send you a little survey that will take you 30 seconds to complete. So that would be appreciated. So that would be very, very helpful. Folks, just want to remind you to stay connected with your local Next Steps Employment Center. Call your professional, the individual that you're connected with, at any time. They're looking forward to actually hearing from you. And, just based on some of the information that Alexander gave you today, you want to include that as part of your chat with the professionals at your Next Steps Employment Center, because they can continue to build on some of those great recommendations so that, the next interview is going to be successful for you, and that's what it's all about. So folks, again, thank you very much. Keep in touch with us with our social media platforms. That's certainly appreciated. And again, if anybody has any questions, I'll invite you to stay behind and we'll be able to assist you. Other than that, that concludes the session. Again, I want to say thank you very much, Alexander. That was a great little presentation. Folks, if anybody has any questions for him, you're welcome to stay behind if he has a few minutes. But other than that, again, thank you very much. Let me give you my email address, folks. I'll give that to you at the bottom here. So it's rodney.scott@tdsb.on.ca. So you're welcome to connect with me at any time if you have questions. I'd be happy to help you out. So again, thank you very much. If anybody wants to stay behind, I'll get you to do so. If you have a few minutes, that is, Alexander.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that I also want to include, and I will include it in the chat box, is if anyone joining this session today has any questions, or even if they are interested in attending one of the sessions that we have on Monday and you want to have a certain topic covered, we always encourage, send us an email to our info account. It's info@swabapp.com. I will include that in the chat box there, so you have that information. Feel free to email us at any time with any questions you might have. We're always happy to help.
They certainly are. They're very, very good. So, and the truth is, folks, think about, how convenient this app is in regards to looking for work and that kind of good stuff. So we want you to share these great techniques and this app with all your friends, because it's very, very important to look for work in a variety of using different platforms. I think we can all agree looking for work today is very different. Oh, yeah. And especially in the time that we're at. And this is a very, very good opportunity to use this as part of your repertoire. Okay, well, folks, again, thank you very much. If there's no other questions, you're not free to go, but I just want to say thank you. And I hope that you take advantage of some of the other workshops that are coming up and that are available to you over the next short while. So again, thanks very much, everybody, and you're welcome to exit the platform at your convenience. Take care.